Good afternoon, and welcome to today's hearing hosted by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. I'm Stephen Schnick, currently serving as chair for the Commission, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this important event today. At the outset, I'd like to recognize Senator Lankford for securing this space for us for our hearing today. I'd also like to recognize in the room Ambassador Mark Green and my former colleague and friend Eric Ueland. Good to have you both with us today. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, is an independent, bipartisan legislative branch agency of the government, created by the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, or IRFA. The Commission uses international standards to monitor freedom of religion or belief abroad and makes policy recommendations to the U.S. President, Secretary of State, and Congress. Today, USCIRF is using its statutory authority under IRFA to convene this hearing. Nigeria. Nigeria is a country with a multitude of ethnic groups, religious traditions, a decades-old democracy, and one of the most religious populations in the continent of Africa. In this afternoon's hearing, we'd like to contextualize religious freedom issues in Nigeria within a governance framework. USCIRF first recommended that the U.S. Department of State designate Nigeria a country of particular concern, or CPC, in 2001. We have continued to do so consistently since 2009. In its 2025 annual report, USCIRF concludes that religious freedom conditions remain poor in the country. Nigeria's constitution declares respect for religious freedom. However, governance at the state level reflects a wholly different practice. In 12 northern states, local governments enforce criminal and family law based on Islamic Sharia. As a result, every person in those states is subject to laws that prohibit blasphemy and similar offenses based on Islamic law, as interpreted by each state's high court. These blasphemy and similar laws, compromising religious freedom, are being used indiscriminately, regardless of religion. Currently, 4 Nigerian Muslims remain imprisoned for blasphemy. Nigeria's Muslim-majority state governments and Sharia courts have also prosecuted non-Muslims, even though the jurisdiction of Sharia law is intended to be limited solely to Muslims. Beyond the problem of these blasphemy laws, a host of other challenges to religious freedom are evident in Nigeria. A major concern is the government's inability to provide security for religious groups, especially in rural areas. Banditry and conflicts between herders and farmers often manifest as interreligious violence. Even when present, security forces are often outnumbered by non-state entities that possess superior firepower. These entities routinely target religious communities. At the same time, non-state actors, including JAS, also known as Boko Haram, the Islamic State West Africa province, known as ISWAP, and Lakurawa, seek to impose a similar interpretation of Islam upon Muslims and non-Muslims alike. While Nigeria's military has made some recent inroads in combating these groups, Nigeria's living in areas controlled by these non-state entities continue to suffer serious religious freedom violations. Government continues to fail in protecting the rights of religious communities. In Nigeria, religious communities have suffered historically from a lack of accountability from the government. In the Northwest, violent insurgent groups attacked Christian communities and persecute Muslims as well. Due to Nigeria's size, population, and underdeveloped infrastructure, full and accurate data on these attacks and the religious communities they target is difficult to obtain, are difficult to obtain. The information we do have, however, paints a disturbing picture. In 2022, in Plateau State, spiraling tensions between faith communities resulted in an attack on a convoy of Muslims, with deaths resulting on both sides. Armed bandits killed a Muslim Hausa woman and her children earlier that year. In 2024, in Zamfara State, bandits killed at least 49 people, many of them Muslim, including a religious community leader. Some states have called for vigilante groups to protect local religious communities. But these groups lack state oversight and sometimes, frankly, exacerbate conflict and mistrust. In March of this year, one such vigilante group, for example, summarily executed 16 Muslim travelers driving from Port Harcourt in the south for an Eid celebration in the north. The travelers had weapons for hunting, but were unknown to locals who claimed incorrectly they were bandits looking to kidnap victims. The government must also take accountability for Nigeria's indigenous religious communities. These communities have histories that span centuries. Yet today, these communities also feel the pressure of persecution by their own governments. In July of last year, the Anambra state government demolished an indigenous shrine with deep meaning and spiritual significance for the local community. In Ebonyi state, the House of Assembly prohibited certain indigenous religious rites, citing fear of violence. In other words, indigenous religious communities in Nigeria risk physical harm simply for practicing their faith. Non-believers, agnostics, atheists face similar dangers. USCIRF has closely monitored the case of Mubarak Bala. Mr. Bala, who was president of the Humanists Association of Nigeria when he was arrested in 2020 over a Facebook post, was originally sentenced to 24 years in prison, which was later reduced to 5. During his time in prison, he was denied medical care. But again, concerned groups around the world rallied for Mr. Bala and his right to practice his belief. Last August, he was finally released. And earlier this year, USCIRF participated in one of the first US government meetings with Mr. Bala following that release. And just last week, Mr. Bala left Nigeria for Germany. Had he stayed in his native Nigeria, he faced the risk of possible future arrest on blasphemy charges, or worse, a mob attack simply because of his beliefs. USCIRF has long recommended that the United States government invest in strengthening civil society to reduce conflict between religious communities, including in Nigeria. Programs supporting protection for vulnerable religious minorities, reintegration of former fighters, and critical aid distributed by faith-based organizations offer powerful and cost-effective protections for religious freedom. These initiatives also provide life-saving humanitarian assistance across religious communities in a country which is considered the linchpin of stability in the Sahel region and for West Africa generally. USCIRF continues to recommend that the United States administration redirect foreign assistance to the government of Nigeria to more effectively reduce violence against vulnerable religious communities. In these technical discussions, we can often lose sight of the human side of religious freedom promotion. To help ground this morning's conversation, I'd like to now turn to my colleague, Commissioner Vicki Hartzler, to shed some light on the severe conditions religious communities in Nigeria face. Vicki?
Thank you, Chair Scheck, for that. And I would thank all the witnesses for being here and for everyone who is here to discuss what is happening to people of faith and to advocate for positive change. This is one of the most important hearings that we could be having. as Nigeria has unfortunately been a slaughtering house for people of faith for far too long. Groups like Genocide Watch have reported that since 2000, 62,000 Christians in Nigeria have been victims of genocide perpetrated by Islamic extremist groups. This is horrific, and the killings don't seem to be slowing down. Just this April, over Palm Sunday weekend, extremists murdered 54 Christians. During the entire season of Lent and Easter, at least 170 Christians were killed. North central Nigeria is an area of particular concern where Fulani Muslim militants swarm in from neighboring countries and kill innocent Christians. In the Mangu district of Plateau State, at least 100 Christians were killed in 16 villages the week of May 19th. Pastors report having to oversee mass burials on an all-too-often basis. One Baucus area pastor, the Reverend Ayuba Matawal, shared with Christian Daily International that, quote, daily kidnappings, molestation, and rape of Christian women, particularly in rural villages across north central Nigeria, especially in the Plateau State, have become disturbingly common. One horrific attack involved 10 Christians being killed who were attending a wake at a home of another Christian who had been murdered. While they were praying, Fulani terrorists invaded the house, attacked the mourners, killing 7 women and 3 men using guns and machetes. The Fulani herdsmen, who often arrive on motorcycles, not only kill but also burn and loot. In one attack, April 2nd and 3rd of this year, 60 Christians were killed in Plateau State, and 383 houses were destroyed. Entire villages are often left destroyed or burned. Many of the victims do not have guns to defend themselves, and the military and police are slow to respond. Even when the villages receive an early warning and reach out to security officials, they often refuse to listen or provide needed protection. This must stop. But the horrific loss of life isn't the only issue. The predominantly Christian farmers are driven from their lands, which is taken over by predominantly Muslim Fulani herdsmen. The Christian farmers who survive the attacks lose their livelihoods, their homes, their food security, and their way of life. It's an injustice that needs to be rectified. The government in Nigeria has created a new Ministry of Livestock Farming to try to mitigate any land issues that could be a contributing factor in the attacks. We will see if this is effective or not. But today's hearing is timely and it's needed. Everyone deserves to worship according to their deeply held beliefs without fear of reprisal. I'm hopeful that the witnesses today will be able to shed some light on the situation and give concrete advice for what we can do through U.S. foreign policy to advocate for those who are suffering because of their faith. So thank you, and I turn to my colleague, Commissioner Maureen Ferguson, to give more insights into the extent of the atrocities.
Thank you, and thank you again to our witnesses today. We're especially honored to have Congressman Frank Wolf with us today, and we look forward to hearing your testimony and your recommendations. Nigeria's challenges are the subject of much analysis and policy debate. We're all aware of that. But what is very clear is that the scale of the ongoing violence is so heartbreaking and so utterly brutal in nature. It truly shocks the conscience, and it's difficult to put into words. So for my brief remarks here, I would like to shed light on stories of the persecuted. And although many different communities of faith are affected by the violence, Nigeria has become the most dangerous place in the world to be a Christian in particular. Some of the most tragic stories involve the kidnapping of girls, often on the basis of their faith. Many of us have followed with great concern over the years the case of Leah Sharubu. Leah, a Nigerian Christian schoolgirl, was kidnapped by the Islamic State West Africa province in 2018, along with 109 other girls from Yobe State. She was only 14 when she was taken from her family. The other girls were released, But Leah was kept. She refused to renounce her Christian faith and remains in captivity to this day. Her loved ones endure every day without the knowledge of her well-being, suffering immeasurable grief, unsure if they'll ever see her again. We all recall the international headlines and outrage from national leaders across the globe when the Chibok schoolgirls were kidnapped in 2014. But do we ever hear that many of those same Chibok schoolgirls are still in captivity today, like Leah, subject to unspeakable sexual violence and abuse? The headlines about the plight of those Chibok girls and other girls like Leah have faded over the years, but their suffering continues. Deborah Yakubu was a Christian college student studying home economics. She was murdered on a college campus in Sokoto State in 2022 over suspicions of blasphemy. Deborah died at the hands of a violent mob, which stoned her to death before setting her body on fire. All this for an alleged WhatsApp voice note deemed insulting to Islam. Last week, I was fortunate enough to talk with a Nigerian man who runs a trauma care center in Maiduguri, the capital city of Borno. His name is Father Joseph Fidelis Bature. He's both a clinical psychologist and a Catholic priest. His Salama Center cares for thousands living in the IDP camps, providing post-traumatic care for those who have suffered abduction, torture, sexual violence, loss of family members, loss of homes, farms, and livelihoods. He shared with me the story of one woman whose village was invaded by Boko Haram. Her husband was killed before her and her sons, beheaded right in front of them. She was then taken into the forest with the other women, locked in cages and subject to abuse. Those who refused to renounce their Christian faith were also denied food. She eventually escaped, but is living in an IDP camp because she cannot return to her village. Father Fidelis told me about another young victim who was kidnapped at age 8 and was abused in captivity for many years before escaping. Some of the girls she escaped with stepped on landmines as they attempted to run for freedom. But she escaped and is now in foster care being treated at this Salama Center for severe post-traumatic and psychological distress. One more story from my conversation with Father Fidelis is illustrative of the Nigerian government's slow reaction or outright inaction in response to the violence. Just last week, he told me, 55 women were attacked just outside their IDP camp when they went to gather firewood. These women had already been violently driven from their homes and were living in a supposedly safe government refugee camp. As they were collecting the firewood, 11 of them were killed and 25 were abducted and taken into the forest. When I asked Father what was the response of the authorities, Father Fidelis laughed. Not a bitter laugh, but it was a very sad laugh. "Oh no," he said, "there was no response. The authorities want to keep quiet about it. They want the impression they're on top of it. They want to present a good picture," is what he said. "They want Western development aid." I did not see any headlines about these women. Finally, in March, I was able to meet with and talk with Bishop Anagbi of the Makurdi Diocese in Benue State when he came to Washington to testify at Chairman Chris Smith's hearing on conflict and persecution in Nigeria in the African Subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Bishop Anagbi testified that there is systematic religious violence, that Islamic extremism has changed the social dynamic of the country, especially in the northern and central regions, and that there's an attempt to eliminate Christian identity through both violent and nonviolent means. He gave the example of the recent closing of all of the Catholic schools in the 12 states in northern Nigeria for Ramadan, the exclusion of Christians from some positions of political power, the destruction of churches, burning of villages, and he said as we've heard, that the perpetrators often operate with impunity. Bishop Anagbi courageously testified, despite great personal risk and threats. But as he said in his testimony, to remain silent is to die twice. So I have chosen to speak. I speak on behalf of the persecuted. So thank you again to our witnesses here today for doing the same, for speaking up on behalf of the persecuted. And I'll turn it back to Chair Schneck to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Commissioner Ferguson. I'd like now to introduce our witnesses. For the first panel, we are delighted, and I am particularly delighted, to welcome back former Congressman and former USCIRF Commissioner Frank Wolf. Frank, of course, is a champion of religious freedom without whom this commission literally would not exist. We will also have the pleasure of hearing from Saman Norquist, former Chief Advisor for International Religious Freedom to the Administrator of USAID. On our second panel of experts, we will hear from Dr. Jumo Ayandela, Visiting Assistant Professor of Practice at New York's University's Center for Global Affairs. We'll then hear from Zachariah Boulous, Fellow at the University of Michigan's Gerald Ford School of Public Policy. And finally, we'll hear remarks from Shamsuddin Magaji Bello, a scholar at The Ohio University and Muslim founder of Kebi Community Action. Thank you all for being here. It's my distinct honor to give the floor to Congressman Wolf.
Well, thank you much, Mr. Chairman. Let me, before I begin, I agree with all three statements. What you said is exactly, that's what's going on, and it's been going on for years. So thank you, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate USCIRF's good work on issues of religious freedom in Nigeria and around the world. I'm also grateful for Congressman Chris Smith's recent hearing on Nigeria. But I'm disturbed to hear that the Nigerian religious leaders, Bishop Wilfred Agalabi and Reverend Father Remigius, received threats and possible arrest on the return to Nigeria because of their testimony before a congressional hearing. This is unacceptable, but especially in a country that received millions in U.S. foreign aid. Tens of thousands of innocent Christians have been murdered in northern Nigeria. And Christians in farming communities continue to be killed and ethnically cleansed by thousands right now. I met with Nigerian Catholic and Protestant religious leaders, and I've seen reports that over 100, this is hard to believe, 100 Catholic priests have been abducted in a country that we give all this money to, and dozens murdered in recent years. Muslims who refuse to pay tribute to jihadists and other armed groups perpetrating these crimes also face severe persecution. At the same time, Christians are being forced out and being denied jobs and education. I've been to Nigeria and witnessed some of this firsthand. I've been to the IDP camps. They are the most depressing place you can go to in the whole world. So I've seen and talked to these people, and many have been in those camps for years and years, almost like nobody cares about them. The U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom has advocated for the persecuted in Nigeria in their annual reports. And a number of the commissioners over the past several years have traveled to Nigeria and have been there and witnessed the situation directly. It has been difficult in this dangerous security situation for a government and others to get a comprehensive, reliable, grounded assessment of the situation. We urgently need a fair, independent, field-based appraisal where even more tragic events to unfold, we would ask ourselves, we would question, why didn't we pay more attention to this issue earlier? We need to end the persecution and the killing of Christians in Nigeria. For almost 2 years, and as a commissioner of USCIRF, I've been urging the Department of State to engage the services of Bob Gersoni, our nation's leading expert in this type of work. In dozens of cases, Bob's unique work has produced insights that have informed and shaped our foreign policy for the better. He has helped our government address conflicts and catastrophes in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Latin America. He is universally respected for his objectivity and ability to create consensus on our security, political and also humanitarian cases. Despite considerable risks, Bob Grissoni, and there are risks, Bob Grissoni is willing to take on Northern Nigeria, which would be his 56th assignment of this type. The aims of Bob's work would be to assess the facts, to illuminate the trends and actors contributing to these problems, and to identify potential interventions and to enhance our cooperative efforts with the government of Nigeria to address these threats before a worse tragedy can occur. I believe it would be in all of our interests to get this assignment moving and get it moving immediately. After persistent efforts, the Department of State contracted to put Bob Grissoni on the case, but his contract was amended those recently, for some strange reason, suspended. Perhaps this was inadvertent, but I believe the project is in line with the pragmatic approach of the current administration. Having served with Secretary Rubio for a number of years, 4 when he was in the Senate, I was in the House, I know, not just I read about it, I heard about it, I saw a story, I know of his deep concern about religious freedom. And I feel certain that he would want to do everything possible to address the situation in Nigeria. If Secretary Rubio were here, he would say, yes, let's get this done. I know he would. The project needs to be pursued because it is not enough to say how bad things are without taking action. We can say, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, but what do we do about it? The U.S. needs to do something that actually will help prevent further killings of Nigerian Christians and moderate Muslims. People are dying every day. It is getting worse, and it has been going on for years. Nigeria has remained among the most dangerous places on earth for Christians, according to Open Doors 2025 World Watch list of countries where it is most difficult to be a Christian. And I'll tell you, the Christians you meet there, they are amazing. One pastor said, does anyone in the West care about us? They are amazing. Earlier, I mentioned the threats of being received by Catholic Bishop of Gonagbe for testifying before a U.S. congressional hearing and reports of over 100 priests being abducted and dozens murdered in recent years. Get this project, please, back on track. Get Bob Grissoni to Nigeria. Let's do something that will bring real help to end the suffering, to stop the killing and the violence. And I thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Will. Ms. Norquist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fellow commissioners, thank you for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. It is an honor to be here, and it's an incredible honor for me to testify today alongside the architect and prime mover of defending international religious freedom, Congressman Frank Wolf. My testimony today will focus on policy recommendations for the administration and Congress to address religious freedom violations around the world. When the Founding Fathers wrote the U.S. Constitution, individual liberty was their North Star, to create an everlasting true path for America's peace, stability, and prosperity. It was the only path. Religious freedom was one individual liberty that all the Founding Fathers uncompromised on to protect the citizens from government interference or persecution. The belief in natural rights is clearly reflected in the Declaration of Independence. It was vital to protect our freedoms from any control or infringement from the government, and when the Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791, religious freedom was the first right that the Founding Fathers wanted to protect. The understanding of the significance of religion by America's founding fathers extended beyond America. In his notes on the state of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson wrote, and I quote, "Difference of opinion is advantages in religion. Let us reflect that the world is inhabited by 1,000 millions of people, that these profess probably 1,000 different systems of religion, that ours is but one, that of 1,000, end of quote. American lawmakers continue to emphasize the vital role that faith play in people's lives and the impact on their societies. In 1998, Congress passed H.R. 2431, the International Religious Freedom Act, when Congressman Frank Wolf, a Republican, introduced the legislation and galvanized bipartisan support of both Republicans and Democrats. President Bill Clinton, a Democrat, signed the bill into law in 1998. Advancing and protecting religious freedom around the world became the law of the land, bringing it into the United States foreign policy. In 2015, Congressman Chris Smith, a Republican, introduced H.R. 1150, the Frank R. Wolf International Religious Freedom Act, to once again underscore the United States' commitment to the protection and advancement of international religious liberty. The bill also aimed to provide more effective tools through diplomacy, foreign assistance, and presidential actions to amplify America's response to religious persecution and discrimination globally. President Barack Obama, a Democrat, signed the bill into law in 2016. Religious freedom is on the retreat across the globe. Discrimination, harassment, repression, and of course persecution against communities of faith are on the rise. Believers of nearly all faiths, including Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Yazidis, and Baha'is, have been targeted by a state or a non-state actor. Both Republican and Democrat administrations included language on the protection of international religious freedom in their national security strategy. However, it was during the first Trump administration that religious freedom became a central pillar of U.S. foreign policy. The 2017 National Security Strategy recognized religious freedom as integral to the U.S. national security, acknowledging that protecting religious minorities helps prevent instability and extremism. At the 2019 United Nations General Assembly, President Trump reaffirmed his commitment, and I quote, "Protecting religious freedom is one of my highest priorities," said the president, end of quote. This bold vision for American foreign policy demonstrated the centrality of the international religious freedom to our national interest. During the first Trump term, I served as the chief advisor to the USAID Administrator for International Religious Freedom. Under effective political leadership of USAID, we were able to expand USAID's partnerships with faith-based organizations and local organizations to provide direct assistance to victims of religious persecution, as well as creating and implementing new assistance programs and funding to help communities of faith that were discriminated against or marginalized. When President Trump signed the Iraq and Syria Genocide Relief Accountability Act, H.R. 390, in 2018, USAID led efforts through the Genocide Recovery and Persecution Response Initiative to assist persecuted Christian and Yazidi communities in northern Iraq. In 2018, President Trump signed H.R. 1918, the Nicaragua Human Rights and Anti-Corruption Act. USAID partnered with the International Republican Institute to focus on the Nicaraguan government repression against religious leaders. It is worth noting that 1 year ago, in May 2024, Secretary Marco Rubio spoke at an IRI event honoring exiled Catholic Bishop Rolando Alvarez for his advocacy for religious freedom in Nicaragua. It is unclear to me that Secretary Rubio knew that IRI's work on religious freedom in Nicaragua was funded by USAID. Most significantly, in December 2020, the Trump administration recognized Nigeria as a country of particular concern due to the brutality of religious freedom violations against Christians by groups such as Boko Haram and the Islamic State in West African province, and the government's failure to stop the targeted attacks on Christians and churches and protect these communities. I worked directly with the White House and Congress to streamline policy funding. Given USAID programmatic nature in the field, this targeted approach yielded effective programs aligning with the President's directive, showcasing America's support and generosity globally. Despite the political support and availability of funds to execute programs, I constantly faced obstacles from within the State Department, both in Washington, D.C. and in the field. U.S. ambassadors often blocked initiatives to implement the administration's policies set by the President of the United States and reaffirmed by the Secretary of State were ignored if those policies conflicted with their views or the host government's preferences. Unfortunately, U.S. ambassador hindered efforts to support persecuted communities and undercut broader foreign policy objectives. 4 ambassadors in key countries obstructed USAID programs promoting religious freedom, including in Nigeria. The ambassador blocked the implementing of programs designed by USAID mission to work directly with local faith communities shortly before the end of the first Trump term. USAID mission directors worked under the authorities of the chief of mission, the ambassadors. This meant that even if mission director, in cooperation with USAID Washington, designated USAID funds, designed programs, and came up with procurement mechanisms for implementing USAID programs to help victims of religious violence, the ambassador vetoed the work to be implemented. With the dismantling of USAID and integrating it into the State Department, it is unclear how policies to help victims of religious violence become tangible programs and assistance on the ground. The State Department lacks the expertise and the structure to implement development or humanitarian programs. America's leadership on advancing religious freedom on the world stage and on the grounds, working with vulnerable communities, is instrumental. America's absence allows adversaries like China to move into strategic countries such as Nigeria. China's presence and influence is expanding in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. Former USAID Administrator Mark Green, my former boss, often said, quote, "China does not do development, China does predatory lending," end of quote. The centrality of international religious freedom to the United States foreign policy during the first Trump administration was unprecedented. On January 19, 2021, one day before the end of his administration, the Trump administration designated the brutal action and abuses committed by the People's Republic of China, PRC, under the control of Chinese Communist Party, CCP, as genocide against the community, predominantly Muslim Uyghurs, in the Xinjiang region. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by posing the first question to this panel. I'm a political philosopher by training, and so for me, I understand religious freedom as an inherent good necessary for human flourishing, essential for all of us as human beings. But I wonder if in the current environment, I might pose a question somewhat differently. Are the interests of the United States advanced by protecting and promoting religious freedom in Nigeria? And I offer this to both of you.
The answer is yes, but to also say, if Nigeria continues this way from an act of terrorism, Nigeria is the bulwark of, say, all the countries around there. ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other things are going on. So if you lose Nigeria, all of Africa, quite frankly, will go. So the answer is yes. But I think fundamentally, and if I could once say, and I know that Secretary Rubio would completely agree with this, my person that works on all of my religious freedom issues, Elise Bauer, who helped me on the legislation, worked for Senator Rubio when I retired. So the answer is yes, it would, and I hope that they will do this thing quickly to save the religious freedom for the people, but also to make sure from a terrorism point of view, Nigeria does not fall.
Yes, absolutely. There's a huge correlation between protecting the religious liberty of communities and the U.S. national interest. We've seen that during the Trump administration. We've always talked about it as a human rights. When it was elevated to the centrality the way that it was during the Trump administration, the world has taken notice. Not only that we talked about it as policies, but the State Department hosted the ministerial every year, where it was put on the radar screen for every country around the world. And we've seen a lot of changes in policies, in programs, in funding, and that was all because the administration and everyone worked with it, recognized the centrality of that work, not just because it flourishes those society, but it protects them, and it's the only thing that gives them resilience during attacks or persecution.
Congressman Wolf, it's good to see you again. I appreciate your testimony, and thank you for all your leadership through the years on international religious freedom. You've been advocating for, and we all are, that Bob Gersony would get this contract again so he can do this investigation. And we thoroughly are advocating for that, and hope that Secretary Rubio will go ahead and make that happen. But in the meantime, you're familiar with International Religious Freedom Act, with all of the options if Nigeria is designated a country of particular concern. Our government, through its foreign policy, has a laundry list of things, both carrots and sticks, that we can do. What would you specifically recommend that you think would be helpful in affecting change there in Nigeria? Would be sanctioning specific government officials there, denying visas, those are some of denying foreign aid or cutting foreign aid. Those are some of the sticks, some of the carrots, might be helping fund particular programs, whatever. What sticks out to you from your travels there, the people you visit with, that you think we could do that would be helpful?
Designation is very, very important. I mean,
Yes.
that is at the top, and I think the Nigerian government understands that, and that will get it. Everything, denying visas, everything you can possibly do. It is so bad when you go there, and particularly go to the Middle Belt and go to the north, you almost can't believe what is taking place. I met with some of I'm glad you mentioned it, the Chibok girls. 40% of the Chibok girls have not come back. You remember hashtag bring back our girls Chibok? 40% of them not come back. And I talked with one parent, they thought their kids were going to come back. It's been 10 years. Leah Sherab, it's been 6 years. And so everything, because if Nigeria goes, all that area, the whole region, the Sahel will go. So everything possible to get their attention. But Bob Gersony would give you guidance as to what you should do and how you should do, and he would work in cooperation with them so they have nothing to fear. Nobody has anything to fear except Boko Haram and people like that for Bob Gersony in doing it.
I'm concerned that the police aren't responding and the security forces aren't being helpful. Do you think any additional foreign aid or training would be helpful there? Stopping corruption in the police force? What do you think we need? Or is it just will? Is it just a matter of Nigerian government prioritizing it?
I think it's will. You go into some of the places and the stories the Catholic priest will tell you that the Nigerian government knows what's going on. And quite frankly, if you've just been to Abuja, you haven't been to Nigeria. Go up in the Middle Belt. Go see Bishop Kwashi in Jos. Go up in the area and talk to them. So everything. And quite frankly, I'm disappointed in our government that we're not doing more. That's why in the previous administration, or the secretary, they did do CPC. That would get their attention. But until America shows that it is really interested in this, perhaps even a trip by President Trump to Nigeria to send a message to them. But everything you could possibly do, but again, we can criticize, we can complain, we can condemn, but Bob Gersony will lay out the agenda of what we should do.
Yes, great. Thank you. Yes, quickly.
Just quickly, to piggyback on Congressman Wolf, there's also a lack of free alignment of our ambassadors here with our own foreign policy. So we've witnessed that during the beginning of the Trump administration. The biggest impediment for us to work on the ground was the State Department. It wasn't just the governments where we had the problems with, because they wouldn't enforce the policy, the White House policy, or the directives that we would get from the NSC on particular. That's why it took us until 2019 to designate Nigeria for a CPC, despite how many years it's been reported in the USCIRF report that it needed to go there. So I would also, equally important as focusing on the local, the central governments, is to also focus on our own bureaucracy and how you implement policies overseas. Thank you.
And I would recommend your full testimony to everyone, because you do go more into detail in that, and I think that's a very important point that maybe hasn't been covered to this point. So thank you very much. I turn to fellow Commissioner Ferguson for questions.
I might follow up on that a little bit, because you've described conditions under the first Trump administration. Now there's been this, massive reorganization. The dust has not settled. So do you have any more specific recommendations given the current conditions?
Well, I am not high there to tell the president what he wants, but I totally see why the realignment and reorganization, because there were a lot of programs that needed to go and reorganization was needed. But there was also absence of leadership, not leadership, but cooperation on the State Department. USAID usually is the little guy when you do programs. It's not the one that tells everyone what to do. The difference in the Trump administration is that we had direct access to the White House. We worked in close cooperation. In 2020, we were able to develop the president's executive order, which I couldn't mention in my remarks. President Trump in 2020 signed the International Religious Freedom Executive Order. That executive order still exists. In that executive order, he mandated both the State Department and USAID to work and mandated their programs to provide assistance to religious freedom in order to implement his policies. That plan is still there. My office and Ambassador Brownback's office worked together. It was signed by the Secretary of State. It was provided to the president. Someone needs to go and get that out and look at it and how we defined it, because it not only talks it as a policy, but it makes the policy implemented in the bloodstream of both diplomacy and programs.
Okay. And then just one for Congressman Wolf. You mentioned your visits to the IDP camps and the terrible conditions there. Do you mind just elaborating on that? Because I've seen numbers, 3 million people in the IDP camps, 5 million.
Well,
It's
I think
astronomical numbers of
I think
people.
it's 5 million and probably growing. It is depressing. It is, the people live in almost nothing. They have very little food. They sometimes go out to villages and come back in. It's just absolutely depressing. If you were in an IDP camp, there's almost no hope. You're just there, and there are women and children and very few men that I would see. So they're just depressing. They're worse than I've ever seen in any other country of the world, and they have nobody to advocate for them. Nobody seems to care about them.
I'd like to thank both of you for your testimony this morning. Congressman Wolf and Dr. Norquist, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We will now move forward with the second panel with Dr. Ayandele. You may begin your testimony when you are situated.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chair Schneck, commissioners, and esteemed colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Dr. Olajumoke Jimo Ayandele. I am a visiting assistant professor at New York University's Center for Global Affairs. Today, I want to focus my remarks on two interconnected concerns as we've been discussing throughout. First, how violence by non-state actors in northern Nigeria has continued to erode religious freedom. And second, how the Nigerian government's response has shaped both the protection and vulnerability of religious communities. In 2024 alone, Nigeria recorded over 4,300 incidents of political violence, which was a 23% increase from the previous year. Civilians also made up nearly half of those who were affected, with armed groups such as the Islamic State West African Province, Boko Haram, communal militias, and Fulani pastoralists increasingly targeting communities based on perceived religious and ethnic identities which undermine the freedom of worship and belief. In the Northeast region, we have seen the Islamic State of West African Province and Boko Haram exploit religious divisions to justify their attacks. Both Christian farming communities and Muslims that are perceived to oppose extremist ideologies or that are perceived to be cooperating with the states remain targets. These groups have used tactics like abductions, killings, and informal taxations on entire villages that are used to not only finance their operations, but also to silence religious life through fear and control. In the north-central region of Nigeria, we've seen that religious affiliation often overlaps with land and identity disputes. Many Christian majority communities have continued to raise credible concerns about persecution, Islamicization, and land encroachment, which they have all viewed as attempts to erase their own communal identities and influence. In the northwest region of Nigeria, where violence is typically framed as criminal rather than religious, we've seen a lot of Muslim communities here suffer mass abductions, killings, and extortions at the hand of bandits. Religious gatherings in this region have also been disrupted and entire communities destabilized. All these security dynamics remind us that religious freedom for both Christian and Muslim Nigerians is threatened on all sides when insecurity becomes the norm. In response, the Nigerian government has had mixed results. Military operations in the Northeast and Northwest have helped to dismantle some of these insurgent networks, as we've been discussing, and we've also seen reintegration programs offer former fighters pathways into civilian life. Community-led efforts in collaboration with the Nigerian government have also remained important. For instance, we've seen a lot of interfaith dialogue and religious media initiatives, which have in many areas promoted peaceful coexistence and have been able to counter extremist narratives. However, these efforts remain fragile and localized. Military operations have at times resulted in civilian casualties, which have eroded that much-needed trust that the Nigerian government needs between communities and the state. Most importantly, the continued failure to distinguish between what is criminal, what is ethnic, what is religious, and how all of these are motivated with violence has made targeted protections for a lot of these communities more challenging. Additionally, many interfaith mediation groups are facing serious challenges, including the lack of training, inadequate funding for their program and projects, and interference from a lot of conflict profiteers. Despite these challenges, we've seen that local success stories are able to show us what is possible when religious tolerance and community resilience are prioritized. To that end, I respectfully offer 3 key recommendations. The first, strengthen identity-based conflict monitoring and early warning systems so that we are able to better distinguish between the various forms of violence and enable more timely targeted responses. The second, professionalize and scale interfaith mediation and community resilience programs so that important mediators are trained and grassroots peacekeeping efforts and peace-building efforts like religious media campaigns remain adequately supported. Last but not the least, it is important that we are able to pair military operations with robust human rights safeguards so that we can ensure civilian protection remains central and that security efforts are aligned with peace building and reconciliation strategies. Nigeria stands at a critical crossroads. Religious freedom is under sustained threat from violent non-state actors. A more coordinated, community-based, and human rights-focused approach is urgently needed to protect Nigeria's diverse religious communities and advance sustainable peace. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mr. Bulus, would you like to speak?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair and members of the committee. My name is Zakaria Bulus, Wiser Diplomacy Fellow from the University of Michigan. This morning, I took an Uber driver and he asked me, "Are you from Sudan?" And I say, actually, people used to describe me as somebody from Sudan, but I'm from Nigeria. He said, Nigeria, smartest people. So, and he said, but in Africa, not in the world. I appreciate the opportunity of being born in Nigeria, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here to present on behalf of the people of Nigeria. Religious freedom in Nigeria faces a serious threat, despite the fact that we are being recognized as the giant of Africa, smartest people, but religion has posed a serious threat to the people of Nigeria, especially in the northern part of Nigeria, where I have personally witnessed some of these issues. Non-state actors continue to target communities with violence and impunity. Christians in northern Nigeria are disproportionately affected by religious and ethnic tension. Many displaced Christian population remain in IDP camps and hesitant to return home due to ongoing insecurity and lack of protection, which exacerbate their vulnerability and marginalization. Even if you ask them to go, they will say, oh, if we go there, they will still attack us and kill us. So in state government, like Nigeria, Christians are often systematic exclusion, such as restriction on religious education, barriers to acquiring land for place of worship, and limited access to public positions, creating a deep sense of marginalization. Violent extreme groups justify attack through radical religious ideology, directly targeting lives, properties, and places of worship. These assaults have displaced thousands in destabilizing communities across the northern part of Nigeria. The government response to displacements and insecurity has at times reflected on even support. Aid and reconstruction effort often appears to prioritize certain groups of people, contributing to a sense of exclusion among people and population and undermining social cohesion, especially the minorities. We acknowledge that there are issues of poverty, especially in the north, that has a widespread of unemployment and create conditions that extreme groups exploit to recruit members and sustain conflict, further destabilize affected communities in northern part of Nigeria. Violence and intimidation have driven many Christians into under-resourced in IDP camps, as I have earlier said, where religious life is constrained and worship often occurs in secrecy or under protection. Fear of renewed attacks continue to hinder religious freedom and disrupt community cohesions. To ensure religious freedom and inclusion, Nigerian authorities at all levels must uphold constitutional protection, ensure there is no discrimination practices, and support interfaith initiatives. Government should be accountable for ensuring equitable service delivery and preventing the abuse of religions for political gain. U.S. foreign assistance have played a great deal in supporting the people of Nigeria. But this should be evaluated because most of the times assistance is being politicized. Peace, security, and religious freedom for all Nigerians is very, very important and key. And therefore, aid should be tied to measurable progress on inclusion, protection of minority rights, and support for grassroots interfaith efforts that build trust and resilience. Despite people's resilience in Nigeria, both Christians and Muslims who have suffered these attacks by non-state actors, Nigeria people continue to face discrimination and violence. A comprehensive approach rooted in constitutional governance, local peace building, and international support is very, very important to ensure all Nigerians can freely practice their faith and live in safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bulus. Mr. Bello.
Chairman, commissioners, and distinguished members of the USCIRF, I am Shamsuddin Magaji Bello. Thank you for this opportunity. I am honored to be invited to speak to you today, not only as someone knowledgeable in African governance and peace building, but also as a devout Muslim from Nigeria who has lived through and worked in diverse interreligious settings and with organizations to understand the complex challenges that haunt our faith communities. As a Muslim, I have often encountered curious and sometimes uncomfortable questions, especially when meeting with people abroad. One question that lingers is, why do Muslims kill Christians in Nigeria? Each time I pause, not with anger, but with sorrow, because the Islam I know and continue to practice is one of compassion, peace, and justice. Is it untouched by politics, grounded instead of faith and human dignity? Religious freedom in Nigeria is not a singular crisis. It is layered, painful, and often misunderstood. It is a tale of weaponized laws, silenced voices, and often broken promises. And too often, it is a story where Muslims themselves, especially those who dissent, differ, or simply live on the margins, are victims of the system meant to protect them. It is important to note that as a Muslim, I believe in Sharia's potential to deliver justice and dignity when properly implemented, but my concern is not with Sharia, but its political exploitation. Instead of defending the oppressed, Sharia has become a shield for the corrupt and a sword against the powerless. The system is deeply compromised. Judges are not selected for their piety or legal wisdom. Politicians install them to serve political ends. In courtrooms that should echo the principle of justice, verdicts are bought, influences is traded, and the scale tilt towards the highest bidder. Regarding the issue of blasphemy laws, it is important to note that the legal prohibitions applied in northern Nigeria are drawn from the same Islamic legal traditions, identical in wordings and spirit to those enforced in countries like Saudi Arabia, a long-standing ally of the United States. This is not necessary to justify the application in Nigeria context, but to illustrate the global complexity of navigating blasphemy laws within the modern legal framework in Nigeria. As a devout Muslim, I recognize the utmost importance of respecting the sanctity of my cherished religion. After all, what is the religion if the followers do not afford reverence? However, blasphemy laws in Nigeria apply with alarming selectivity. They have become weapons used not to defend the faith, but to silence alternative voices within Islam. A vivid example is Sheikh Abdul Jabbar Nasir Kabara, a renowned Muslim cleric in Kano, who, because of heated debate, is now incarcerated. But even more chilling is the state's systematic persecution of Sharia Muslims. In northern Nigeria, religious clerics often emerge without any regulatory insight to assess their theological credentials or preaching content. Extremist clerics usually rise in influence through charisma, financial support, or political backing, not through any formal training or certification. They quickly gain social and political prominence as long as they can afford to construct mosques and attract following. In many cases, even when their rhetoric is divisive or extreme, they are tolerated as long as they can mobilize support for political actors. This environment of unchecked influence is precisely how individuals like Muhammad Yusuf, the founder of Boko Haram, rose to prominence. They were initially ignored or exploited by political establishment until their ideologies turned violent. Terrorist groups like Boko Haram, ISWAP, and recently Lakrawa portrayed themselves as defenders of Islam. But let it be clearly stated that countless Muslims have died and continue to die at the hands of these self-proclaimed Islamic insurgents. Mosques have been bombed during Jumat prayers. Muslim scholars who reject extremism have been assassinated. Muslim families, mine included, live with trauma of being killed, raped, or in silence. In recent times, banditry and kidnapping for ransom have become the order of the day, especially in the northern part of the Nigeria. Many communities have been raised and burnt by these groups of people, and many Muslims live in fear of uncertainty. Yet the Nigerian government has failed to act with the urgency this crisis demands. In some cases, it has been enabled through chaos and inaction. At the heart of this crisis is a broader betrayal. Politicians and some clerics have commodified Islam as a religion. It is no longer a sacred path, but a means to an end. To support the effort of improving religious freedom in Nigeria, it is important that USCIRF urge the Nigerian government to recognize and engage with complex, multifaceted challenges facing Muslim communities, including internal persecution and systematic injustice. Constructive engagement should encourage reform that strengthen the independence of Sharia court and promote greater accountability and oversight. It is equally important to support initiatives that enhance transparency in the recognition of religious leadership to prevent the exploitation of religious platforms for extremities and political gain. Elevating inclusive and justice-oriented Islamic voices, particularly those working towards peace, interfaith dialogue, can contribute meaningfully to national unity. Developing humanitarian assistance can also help address the needs of all communities affected by insurgent violence, including mental health and post-conflict recovery support. Finally, encouraging dialogue and accountability in response to major incidents such as the Zaria massacre can enforce the rule of law while strengthening Nigeria's long-standing stability and democratic values. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Bello. If I may begin with the first question, it strikes me that a thread running through the testimonies of each of you is the thread of civil society. So I noticed that Dr. Ayandela spoke about imperative of developing local initiatives. Dr. Boulos spoke about assisting grassroots efforts. And I hear much the same in your comments as well, Mr. Bello. I wonder what the United States government might do to assist in the development of this kind of civil society focus. What can be done to encourage the development of local grassroots initiatives of the sort that all of you seem to be recommending?
More funding for such initiatives. They're already there. Right now, one of the challenges is the inadequate funding for these groups and more training. But with regards to training, it should be more of a partnership where we listen to what these communities themselves want, what these interfaith dialogues want, and then give them the tools so that they are embedded into the communities. And that is because a lot of leaders in these communities are also religious. So if we can give them the training, if we can give a lot of these platforms that funding, where we can help them with, this is how you can prevent conflict, this is how you can foster reintegration, that would go a very, very long way for the United States.
Yeah, in addition to what my colleague have just said, funding is good, but also recognizing the local voices is also very, very important. Some of the time, if we talk about local voices, it is only maybe men are in majority of coming out to represent the community. So if we talk about local participation, we have to talk about every part of the community. Women, youth, elders, they are very, very important. But when you keep some people at home or you send some people to farm and you say you are here to represent them, that is not localization. Another thing that is very, very important is that localization is good, but also having some kind of expertise is also good. It serves as checks and balance. So when we preach localization, we should also note that localization alone at this point, based on my own experience, cannot thrive if there is not check and balance. Expertise is good to build localization, but in the general form, hearing the local voices and including them in decision-making, gender balance is very, very key and important.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very good one. And we have to know as much as possible that the same issue of corruption we accuse government of has also kind of trickled down to these faith-based communities. And just funding alone is not enough if we don't have this monitoring and evaluation, because if we keep sending money to support them and there are no checks, it will end up just going to the wrong hands, and those that they require this kind of assistance to better their daily activities or daily life will be at the receiving end. Even though we want government to, as much as possible, we need the role of the government. The government of Nigeria can play a role, but we want this independence of faith communities to interact with these communities effectively.
I'd like a quick comment based on your what you just mentioned there, Mr. Bello, emphasizing faith-based communities as maybe the particular seeds for the development of this necessary civil society in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was struck by something you said in your testimony, Dr. Bullis, about that U.S. foreign assistance is often politicized, and then you said it should be tied to substantive progress and integration into society. And I thought that was a brilliant point that we need to focus in on as we talk about funding, USAID, renewing funding. Can you talk a little bit more about how you think, if we're able to send some money there, how it should be distributed so there's the accountability that Dr. Bello was also referring to?
Yeah, so seeking government blessing is very, very important, but also government should also allow the civil society, for example, to participate in what is being given to the state or to the community to work with. Government should not involve themselves in maybe development or humanitarian activities purely saying that you should give us the money and we will do the work. There are people that a lot of organizations who are on ground to be able to do that, and government should provide a space for them and then check what they are doing, if they are doing it as expected. So one of my experiences is also in this kind of partnership is that you will see that partnership is being created, but at the same time, those partnerships are being tied in such a way that local organization they will just sign the partnership, but in real sense, if something happened, for example, they will say, okay, we will settle the issues outside Nigeria, for example, which is not, to me, a viable means of executing partnership. So collaboration with government is very, very key, but there should be a core principle of neutrality and impartiality of distribution of aids and support to people.
But wouldn't you say also that you don't give the full money? You were saying, the way I took your testimony is that there has to be substantive progress and proof of integration before then you give them a little more money, and then a little more money, instead of just, oh, here's the money for the program, and just assuming that everything's good. So don't you think that'd be a wise way to monitor and make sure that the money actually goes where it needs to go?
Yeah, sure. That is what I also believe
Okay.
in. That is what I have
I just wanted to clarify
meant
that.
to say it, yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Dr. Avondale, question for you. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very concerned about the idea that people are calling for help and nothing happens. The local police don't come, or law enforcement. And so could you talk about, there's a discussion in Nigeria of shifting Nigeria's law enforcement model from a federally controlled national police force to a decentralized one, with each of the 36 states having their own separate police force. So do you think that is helpful? Do you think that the state police units can more effectively reduce the violence by the non-state actors targeting religious communities than the federal police? What's the role in local authorities? what model would you use to make sure that there is adequate security and that people are responsive?
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that question. For me, I would propose a hybrid governance model where we have various actors working together to help with security. So that would consist of, obviously, the military, the police, but also vigilante groups, as well as civil society groups, working together to decide what an early warning system is. Basically communication mechanisms between all of these players, and what that means for a local context. I would also change the conversation, especially when we're thinking about religious freedom, to what is peace? What does peace mean for you? I think that would also go a very long way with how to think about the types of programs and projects that the government can promote in these different communities in increasing religious tolerance. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Ferguson?
I guess this question would be for any of you. How do you think the government, the Nigerian government, can better serve the people in the IDP camps? How can improvements be made? Because as one of our, I forget who said this now, but I mean, people can't even go back to their villages. So what are some of the solutions there?
Yeah, I think the solution is to give them a sense of belonging, recognize that these are our citizens. They are not from neighboring countries. They are Nigerians in the first place. But you see, as the first set of speakers have rightly mentioned, if you go to the IDP camps, you will pity those people as if they are second-class citizens. So they don't have good hygiene system, good sleeping place, and then it contributes to gender-based violence. And so I think the government needs to pay more attention to this. I am happy that there is a Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs in Nigeria. So I think they should pay much attention to the plight of PD and those people who are living in ITB camps. If you cannot secure their place of origin so that they can return, give them a dignified life in the IDP camps, because what we have doesn't look like IDP camps, as previous speakers have said. So I believe that there are much to do in that. Most of the time, international partners have done a great job, but we need to also complement that effort from international partner.
Mm-hmm. I can also add to that. I do agree with what my fellow colleague has said. I would also say that the government needs to show up more in these IDP camps. When I had gone there over the summer, one of the complaints where we do not see our government representatives. Most of the people who take care of us are, partners, international organizations, and we really do not know where we stand with our government. So showing up more is definitely very important to increase that legitimacy that government needs in building that trust and in winning the hearts and minds of Nigerians. Second is changing the way that we see security. So within the IDP camps, they do feel secure, but when you go 5 miles or 5 kilometers away from the IDP camps, that's when insecurity occurs. So it's important to shift the way that we see security from militarily to a human security approach where, the government has to also secure their well-being, their ability to worship, being able to go back to their various communities. It's so key for us to win that fight against violent extremism.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Bello, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. The government has a vital role to play. However, the government, people have no even business being in IDP camp if the government is really dedicated towards making them go back to their homes. Security is very crucial, and if the government is able to provide that, they can go back to their homes. That being said, we know that Nigeria is a very big country with a lot of challenges, and if the government tries its possible best to ensure that they treat they give these IDP camp people their fundamental human rights, ensuring that they have freedom of religion, they have access to water, sanitation, and hygiene, it will go a long way. We know that there is this attitude of government saying international donors are there, they will do it for us, and so on. The system is there that maybe the government is kind of flippant that since the USCID and other agencies are coming to help, it's not their responsibility. They will focus on other things. Just like you said, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs is there in Nigeria, but they don't really prioritize those people living in IDP camps. Instead, they have their other priorities of giving people conditional cash and other people. This particular IDP really needs to be prioritized by the government through this ministry to ensure that these people also feel like human beings and before they get reintegrated back to the society. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up. Do the people in the camps have the right to vote?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is this a campaign issue for someone running in Nigeria?
More or less, you can say that with certainty, but it's something you could also, it's an angle that one can look at it too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just thinking as a former lawmaker, it seems like this would be a good constituency that is in need of a champion. And somebody ought to become the champion over there of them as we are here. Thank you.
And maybe just one more. I assume there's not much in the way of education of the children in the camps.
Actually, there is. In some of the IDP camps that I visited, there were schools. There are mobile schools. The issue is the teachers, right? You might have a physical building. Do you have enough teachers who want to come into these border communities to actually educate the students? That's the disconnect.
Thank you.
I wonder if I might change the topic just a little bit. I'm curious about the faith communities themselves as they address the problems of Nigeria today. And I wonder if each of you just might talk about that a little bit. To what extent are the faith communities being successful, and to what extent are they being unsuccessful, or perhaps even making the matters worse?
Faith communities in terms of what?
The Christian communities, the indigenous communities, the Muslim communities.
In terms of service provision to the community, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, if I get you, are you talking about how faith community come to foster peace, or I don't get the...
And address not just peace, but address the interreligious tensions that...
I would say there have been harmony between, at a point, there have been harmony between this interfaith communities, or let's say interfaith groups. However, there also exists tension and distrust because religion has become a political tool in Nigeria. And sometimes when these faith communities come together as one, there is always this tension between different communities that don't want this kind of fusion together. So this mistrust whenever someone tries to come and kind of solidify or kind of unite these groups together, there is always a way a division is being brought in. So this has really been an impediment to the growth of this interfaith group and also the development of this region. Yes.
I know of the role that the Church of the Brethren are playing in Nigeria through interfaith programs in the northern part of Nigeria, where Christians and Muslims will come together and discuss issues, try to work together, and then implement program together. In one of my former organizations, I know we have collaborated with organizations like Jamaatul Nasrul Islam and other faith-based community in order to go into the community and then provide humanitarian assistance and support to the people of that are in the community. So, yeah, I know that there are other stakeholders. For example, those two guys from Kaduna, they have been so famous trying to make sure that they sensitize people in community and then provide necessary peace-building initiatives. So much have been done. I know Sultan and then Bishop Onaikon in the past have also done something similar. So I want to also acknowledge that much have been done. There are people who are doing great job. Bishop Hassan Matthew Kuka doing great job. So, but it's not enough. People are dying every day. Even yesterday, even last week, people are still being died. They are still attacking people, killing people. That is the major concern.
And I can add to that with the many success stories that we have seen with interfaith dialogue. I know last month there was one in Yobe State, and Jigawa also has a very, very successful one, Jigawa State. What I would say is, for these states that have been successful, it's very important that we actually go into these communities to find out what is working and see whether we can scale it up. Because there are some success stories in pockets of areas, and we need to learn from them so that we are able to increase that religious tolerance that we need in northern Nigeria.
Good. I have a quick question here to Dr. Bullis about the conflict between the Muslim herders and the Christian farmers. How is the federal government addressing these issues? Do you think they're being effective? And what can be done to help this conflict that is exacerbating the religious persecution as well?
Yeah, as somebody who have grown up in the rural place also, I have seen how there is a very good relationship between herders and farmers in the past. But of recently, this relationship is no longer cordial. I remember 2 years ago, my father luckily escaped because they attacked him on his farm, and he miraculously escaped. Otherwise, he will have been attacked. So I think government should give more attention to this. These things has been happening in part of the northern part of Nigeria, Benue State, for example, and other places that are being targeted. People cannot go to their farm and then make sure they provide livelihood. So I think government should give a very, very serious consideration to this, because this is something that is very, very strange. It's not part of Nigerian way of life in the past. So, yeah.
Just to follow up, as a supporter of the Second Amendment here, it concerns me that a lot of the farmers don't have the ability to protect themselves. They don't have guns. Is that correct? And do you think if there were the additional to be able to keep and bear arms, that would help deter or prevent some of the violence, or would it actually increase it?
I will say that more security needs to be employed. And
From the outside, you mean? Or
securities are not enough. We cannot say that the farmers should go and take arms and then start to, even though there is one key stakeholder that says people should defend themselves, but I will advocate more of government taking more responsibility to ensure that they provide more security and then more action to make sure that people are safe, people can go to their farm, and then do their work without any fear.
thank you.
Well, that is all the time that we have today. I'd like to thank the witnesses for their crucial testimony. It has just been incredibly helpful hearing from you all, bearing witness to the impact of the issue of religious freedom in Nigeria. So I want to thank all of the witnesses for their time. And I want to thank the audience, especially for being here today. Appreciate that you're all here. I'd like to thank USCIRF staff for all that they have done in making today possible. I think you all realize how hard these things are to arrange, and they deserve a great deal of credit. Now, I don't want to frighten you, but I'm going to use this one more time. This hearing is adjourned.